The morning had begun like any other, but something felt wrong the moment Daniel Parker stepped into Maplewood Elementary. He had walked these hallways for nearly a year, dropping off his 7-year-old son, Liam, but today the air was unusually heavy, almost still, as if the building itself sensed something that he didn't. He noticed it the moment he reached room 2A. Miss Harper, the teacher whose warmth could brighten even the darkest weekday, stood by her desk, yet she seemed barely present. Her hands trembled slightly as she arranged books, her shoulders curled inward, as if trying to hold herself together. Her skin was pale, far paler than the usual gentle glow she carried every morning, and her eyes held a sorrow that didn't belong in a classroom filled with crayon-drawn rainbows and alphabet charts. Daniel felt a chill crawl up his spine. It was the kind of look people wore when life had quietly taken too much from them. If you believe kindness and second chances can change people's lives, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your support keeps these stories alive. As Daniel continued watching her, he couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was weighing on her shoulders. The children around her buzzed with their usual morning energy, but Miss Harper moved like someone drifting inside her own storm, her smile strained and barely holding together. Daniel had spent the last 2 years rebuilding his own life after the loss of his wife, and he recognized that expression, a silent, hidden breaking. It was the look of someone forcing strength because the world expected it. That recognition hit him harder than he expected, stirring pieces of his own grief he thought he'd long buried. He tried to push the thought away as he knelt to hug Liam goodbye, but as he straightened, he saw Miss Harper sway slightly where she stood. She caught herself on the edge of her desk, breathing slowly as if fighting dizziness. Daniel hesitated, torn between, respecting her space and the growing concern gnawing at his stomach. He ultimately chose not to say anything right away. He didn't want to make her uncomfortable, but as he walked out of the classroom, he promised himself he would check on her later. Some instincts were too strong to ignore. Throughout the day, his mind wandered back to her unusual pallor, the tremor in her hands, the weariness in her gaze. At work, even as he repaired engines and talked to customers, her image lingered. By lunchtime, his worry had turned into anxiety. She was the kind of teacher who noticed when a child's smile dimmed, who stayed after school to help kids struggling with reading, who sent home handwritten notes praising even the smallest progress. Someone who poured so much love into others rarely admitted when they themselves needed help. Daniel knew that type of struggle too well. He had lived it after Emily's passing. He had drowned in responsibilities, always pretending he was fine for Liam's sake, until one night he collapsed under the weight of all he'd refused to share. When he returned to the school that afternoon, the parking lot was mostly empty. The sun dipped behind the tall pine trees lining the playground, casting long shadows across the asphalt. As he approached the classroom, he saw Miss Harper sitting at her desk, her back slightly hunched. The overhead lights flickered faintly, giving the room a muted, tired glow. Papers were stacked neatly, markers capped, books aligned, yet she looked like someone who had spent every ounce of energy simply existing through the day. He stepped closer, gently knocking on the open door frame. She lifted her head, startled, and forced a small smile, but it was weaker than usual, as though even smiling cost her more effort than she could spare. That was when Daniel finally asked the question that had been haunting him since morning: why she looked so pale, why she seemed unlike herself. He had expected her to brush it off, maybe blame lack of sleep or a coming cold. But what he saw instead was her eyes filling with a desperate, quiet vulnerability. For a moment she said nothing. Then, as though a dam had cracked inside her, she exhaled shakily and looked away. Her truth, when it finally unfolded, stunned him into silence. Miss Harper told him she had been diagnosed with a severe autoimmune condition just a month earlier. She explained how her immune system attacked her own body, leaving her exhausted, in pain, and fighting through unpredictable waves of weakness. She described the endless tests, the medication that made her nauseous, the sleepless nights spent wondering if she would lose the job she loved more than anything, because her body was betraying her. She admitted she had no close family in the state and had been trying to manage everything alone, teaching full-time, undergoing treatment, paying medical bills, and trying to hide her symptoms so her students wouldn't worry. She had been pale because she had fainted in the teacher's lounge that morning, barely regaining herself before class began. She said she felt embarrassed, terrified even, that people would see her as weak or incapable. As Daniel listened, emotions stormed through him. Pain for what she was enduring, admiration for her strength, guilt for not noticing sooner, and a fierce protectiveness he hadn't expected. He remembered all the days she encouraged Liam, all the extra hours she spent making learning joyful, all the little kindnesses she showed without expecting anything in return. And this whole time, she had been quietly suffering in the background, fighting a battle no one knew about. From that day on, something changed inside Daniel. He couldn't walk away knowing she faced all of this alone. He started helping in small ways at first, offering to carry boxes of supplies to her car, giving Liam's class snacks so she wouldn't have to buy them out of her own pocket, volunteering for classroom activities. When she had medical appointments, he rearranged his work hours so he could pick up Liam and help supervise the class for the last half hour of the day. He told her she didn't need to thank him, but the gratitude in her eyes every time he showed up reminded him that sometimes the smallest actions could be lifelines. As weeks passed, their connection deepened. Daniel found himself drawn to her resilience, her gentleness, her quiet bravery. And even though she tried to hide it, he saw the days when the pain was worse, the way she pressed her hand to her ribs, the way her breath hitched when she stood too quickly, the way her voice softened when fatigue overwhelmed her. He admired her even more for continuing to show up, for loving her students with a devotion that illness couldn't dim. Their conversations grew longer after school. They shared stories about their